everybody, it's Taylor from Dames a la Mode, and today we're going to be working on a high-waisted petticoat that's appropriate for the 1790s through the Regency period. Basically any time when you have one of those high waist. This is a super easy project to make because you don't need any patterns, and in fact you really truly only need 2 measurements to start with, so it's something that basically anybody can do. This is a really great way to dress up another outfit you may already have where you want to add a different color, and it's a nice way to use up those weird amounts of fabric that you end up with or that you can find sometimes for a really good deal. So my project used about 3 yards of fabric. You may need a little bit more or a little bit less depending on your height, but you know, sometimes you can find these great remnants for really cheap of like 3 yards and you're like, what will I ever do with this? Well, this is a great way to use those up and bring some new life to one of your outfits. Measurement number 1 is going to be wherever you want your waistline to be to wherever you want your petticoat to end. In my case, that is from just under my bust to about my ankles, which is 44 inches. To that measurement, I'm adding 1 inch for seam allowance for a total of 45 inches. Obviously, this measurement will vary depending on your height and where you want your waistline to be and where you want the hemline to be. I'm using a stiff silk taffeta that is about 50 inches wide, so I only need 2 panels of fabric, meaning that I need a total of 90 inches of fabric or 2.5 yards. You can make this style of petticoat with basically any type of fabric you would use for a dress, but keep in mind that if you want something that is really full, like you often see in the 1790s, or if you're using a fabric that is very thin or sheer, you may want to consider using 3 or even 4 panels of fabric, but the construction method is exactly the same no matter how many panels you're going to use. Once I know my measurement, I'm breaking my yardage of fabric down into 2 panels of 45 inches. I have a bit left over, which I'm going to set aside because we're going to be using that a little bit later. These pieces get pinned together along both edges, though I'm leaving the top of one panel open for about the last 6 inches or so. I'm just marking that area with double pins to make sure I don't accidentally sew it closed. And then everything gets sewn up on my machine. Once it's sewn up and ironed, I'm going to put in the hem. I'm just turning it under twice with 1/2 inch folds and giving it a good ironing. Don't worry about those errant threads left over from tearing the fabric. All those will get pulled out in just a moment. I promise I'm not sewing them into the hem. Now we're going to move on to measurement number 2, the waist. On me, this measurement was taken right under my bust line, but yours will be wherever you want the waistline of this to be. While you're here, also measure how wide across the front you want the flat part of your petticoat to be. I'm just eyeballing what I think will look good, and in my case that's 9 inches. To make the waistband, I'm using a piece of self fabric, but you could easily make this more simple and use a piece of twill tape. I cut a 2-inch strip fabric the length of my waist measurement plus 2 inches for an overlap. Then I ironed under each edge and folded the whole thing in half. I then marked the waistband in the center front, and I also marked where I wanted the flat part of the petticoat to be. Since my length of flatness was 9 inches, I marked 4.5 inches on either side of the center. This way I know where to start the pleats. I'm also marking those same spots on the skirt panels themselves as a starting guide. Now it's time for what is the only annoying and kind of fiddly bit about this whole thing, which is the pleats. I'm going real casual here and just eyeballing my pleats. Since this petticoat closes on the side, there was only a little bit of pleating on one side and then a lot of pleating on the other, which is the part that goes all around the back of the petticoat. I just pinned, checked the measurement, and fiddled with the pleats until I had them long enough to match up with my waistband. There's definitely a more precise way to do this, but this is not the channel for precision. I'm a very YOLO seamstress. I did mark the center back on the waistband and the skirt panels to assist with lining everything up though. Note that at the center back there is an inverted box pleat so that the pleats radiate out in different directions from the center back point. Once everything is pleated to where it needs to be, I pinned on the waistband and then sewed everything down. I'm doing this by hand, but it could be easily done on the machine if you wanted. For my method, I sewed down the front part, then folded over the back edge and sewed that down as well. I offset the waistband slightly so that the stitches in the back are covered up by the waistband in the front. Alright, I just finished sewing in the waistband, and now if I put hooks and eyes on the side and added the shoulder straps, I would be done with this petticoat. And I've been sewing for maybe 5 to 6 hours on it. I know that I'm wearing different clothes now, but that's because I started yesterday afternoon and worked for a few hours and then worked for a few hours today. So you can see that it's like essentially done. But I'm not going to be done yet because I'm going to add ruffles to the bottom of this petticoat. Now, ruffles are not extremely common on the bottom of a petticoat in this era. Typically, you're seeing petticoats that are either completely plain around the hem, or they might have something like embroidery or a painted hem or some sort of band or something, but ruffles were not extremely common. However, there are a few examples of them, and because of that, I'm going to use these on this petticoat. And that is primarily because not only is this going to be a first level petticoat that I'll use under my open robes and Spencer jackets and things like that that you will see, but I also will be able to use this petticoat for later styles like the 18 teens and 1820s when you have a more triangular silhouette and you need more fullness at the hem, and you can help to use petticoats to fill that out. Every time I'm sewing something, if there's a way that I can make it functional for multiple time periods, I try to do it. It just means that my costume closet is a lot more versatile and I don't have to do work twice if I can do it once. Very important. So I am going to use my few historical examples and add a narrow ruffle to the bottom of this petticoat. If I can get by with 2, I'm going to try to do that, but I don't know how much fabric I'm going to have. So we're going to start out making ruffles and seeing how much I have left to work with. So to help me determine how much ruffle I had to play with, I just went ahead and did like a test strip, and then I gathered it. So this is a 2-to-1 ratio. I started out with 20 and I moved it down to 10, and I'm really happy with this look of this ruffle. It's not too full, it's not too skimpy, and I think with a 2-to-1 I have enough to do like some nice ruffling with what I have left here to play with. Using the leftover from my skirt panels, it's time to see how much ruffle I can manage with what I have left. Knowing I want a 2-to-1 ratio on ruffles and that I want the finished ruffle to be 3 inches deep, that means I have enough to do just one ruffle, but it will be nice and full. Annoyingly, I was only about 8 inches short to be able to do a second one, alas. I broke down the remaining fabric into strips for the ruffles, and then I sewed all the strips together to make one long piece of fabric. I was all set to sew my, my ruffle pieces by machine, but when I did it, I just realized that I hated the way that it looked so much because it was just so clear that they were machine sewn that it bugged me. So instead I took the ruffle piece home last night and I hand hemmed it, which took several hours, but the result is much more attractive, so I guess I'm happy with it. Part of the issue is that the thread I'm using to sew this does not actually match the fabric very well. It's just something that I had in my stash. And you know, when it's like your seam lines, you can't tell that much, but it was really obvious on the hem of this ruffle. Now I'm going to actually create the ruffle itself. And to do that, I'm going to be using the cording method to create these ruffles. So what I've done is I've ironed down about 1/2 inch at the top of these ruffles. And I'm going to take a piece of twine that I have. It's kind of a pretty heavyweight, stiff twine, but you could really use anything, yarn or something, whatever you have on hand. I just happen to have this twine. And the twine is going to get sandwiched in between the fold of that ruffle where it's turned down at the top. So it just gets sort of squeezed in there. And then using the zipper foot on my machine, I'm going to sew right up alongside the edge of this twine, and I'll insert the twine as I continue to go down the length of the ruffle. It just all gets put in there, so that eventually I'll have this entire piece of ruffle sewn down with the twine encased in the fold of the top of the ruffle. All right, now it's time for the fun part. I have all this done. First, we're going to anchor the end, one of the ends, by putting a pin through the actual cord so it can't pull through. I like to put in 2 just to make sure. And then you're going to find the other end and you're going to start gathering. Now it's going to take a long time to gather all this down, but you can see that it makes a really nice, pretty ruffle that's also nice and strong and stiff. This is one of those very fun, satisfying tasks. As you're pulling in your ruffle, it's going to have a tendency to curl, but when you're actually applying it to your piece, your dress, you'll flatten all these things out. I really love this method of ruffling. Lining up the seam lines of the ruffle with the seams in the skirt and the center front and center back allows you to balance out the ruffle to ensure you have the same amount in each quadrant. Then you can just compress or open the ruffle as needed for it to fit. Once everything is pinned on, I turned under one edge of the ruffle and attached it to the other, completing the circle. Then I sewed down the entire ruffle using large spaced back stitches. Now it's time to add the shoulder straps, which are necessary to hold up a petticoat that doesn't have a natural waist. Without these, it will just slide down your body and rest at your natural waist, or below, which of course is no good. I'm cutting 2 lengths of twill tape and pinning them close to the center back of the waistband. These will cross in the back, which prevents the straps from sliding off your shoulders as you wear them. You want them to cross very low and close to the waistband so they stay hidden behind your dress. If they're placed far apart, the crossing point will happen high on the back of your neck or shoulders and will show under your outfit. No good. Alright, so I have the back on, and now I'm just pulling it around the side and testing how long I need these straps to be. I'm going to go on the outside of my bust line so it doesn't sort of interrupt the line or anything like that. Or if I have a really open neckline, like some of the 1790s ones, this would show if it crossed in the front. So I go on the outside. And remember, because it's crossed in the back, it's not going to fall off my shoulders. So I'm going to take a pin. I'm going to pin in right there. Very careful not to stab myself. And then I'm going to pin in the other one. All right, and now I have the straps that are going to hold this petticoat up so it doesn't slide. Now I can take this off. And now I know where to sew my shoulder straps. Then I just sewed the shoulder straps down and added hooks and eyes at the waistband and in the opening of the petticoat to hold it closed. I hope you enjoyed this simple sewing project. This is great for a beginner, and it's a great way to use up weird little bits of fabric that you have, and it's a great way to easily change the look of an outfit. I hope you'll try making one out yourself. Thanks so much for watching.